right. Is that working for everybody?
I can see it fine.
Okay. All right, so as Catherine mentioned, I'm the city forester here in Cheyenne. I work for the Cheyenne Urban Forestry Division, and I've been doing forestry for a long time. I'm actually almost 50 years old, if you can believe it. I know I don't look it, but been doing forestry since about the early 1990s. And that's taken me from Colorado to Wyoming to Minnesota and back to Wyoming. So I've got a perspective from several different areas, and I've done all kinds of different forestry jobs, not just in community forestry. So it's been a great career, and I'm very fortunate, I think, to still be working in forestry, a career that I definitely loved throughout the years. So we'll get started. Pictured are a couple of my favorite trees in Cheyenne. Prior to living in Cheyenne, I didn't have a lot of respect for cottonwood, which is the tree pictured on the left. But when you move to a climate that is very difficult to grow trees, such as Cheyenne, you definitely come to appreciate some of those species that might be considered trashy or junky in other communities. But the cottonwood, especially the plains cottonwood, is one of my favorite trees. This is one at the golf course. And then the one on the right is the bur oak. Bur oak is, one of the most widely distributed oaks you'll find in the upper United States, including the Midwest, West. It's very prevalent in the Intermountain West. It's native to Wyoming, the Black Hills, but a much longer lived tree than cottonwood, but a very cool tree in my opinion. Okay, here we go. So if you guys didn't know, you probably already know this, but trees are important to any city. That's why we have a city forestry division here in Cheyenne. That's also why we have a very, as far as Wyoming goes, very progressive development code that requires tree planting and landscaping with any new development in Cheyenne. Even existing development that is getting a makeover has to provide landscaping and trees, because we realize the benefits of trees are just more than aesthetics. They're infrastructure. They do a lot of things for our community. They help shade buildings, they shade sidewalks, they shade streets, they reduce maintenance on some of our streets and sidewalks. They improve the livability of our communities, the well-being of our citizens. They help encourage physical activity. And that's why so many communities are planning more with trees in the back of their mind, with landscaping in mind. And it's helped to build community pride, strong neighborhoods. And there's also a lot of research that supports trees improving the economic well-being of communities as well. Improves tax revenue, it helps businesses with their bottom line. And if you have any interest in looking up some of this research, Kathy Wolf at the University of Washington has a lot of really awesome research that she's done. Okay, so a little bit about the Cheyenne Urban Forestry Division. I always try to promote our division a little bit when I give these talks. You guys are a captive audience here, right? You got to listen to what I have to say anyway, so I might as well promote our organization a little bit. So we were established in 1982. We're part of CRE, which is the Community Recreation Events Department. We're the oldest tree city in Wyoming. We've been around 38 years. We maintain all city-owned trees, which is around 15,000 trees that we've got inventoried. We also do the maintenance, well, not necessarily direct maintenance, but indirect maintenance of about 8,000 street trees. We do take care of the trees in the downtown. The combined value of all these trees is around 35 million. And then those are our tree species breakdown on city property and within the right-of-way. So you can see cottonwood and spruce make up the majority, with pine, ash, elm, crabapple, and others. Let's see, we've got some educational resources available. I don't know if many of you have been to the High Plains Arboretum west of town, but it's a really cool site. It was developed in the early 1930s as a research station, and they trialed trees and shrubs and all kinds of plant material from around the world to see if it would grow in Cheyenne. And their goal was to make these plants available to settlers that were coming west so that they would have trees and different crops that they could grow when they moved out here. So it's a really cool place to go. We do have a lot of trees out there and shrubs that are signed. There's maps as well. You can walk around and learn about some of these really old trees that are still alive. There's several that come from foreign countries, so it's pretty unique.
Hey,
We also
Mark,
have, yes,
can I ask you a quick question? This is Deb.
sure.
The term Tree City, I'm not exactly sure what that means. I mean, I know it means that it's got trees, but is there some specific criteria that defines a tree city?
Yeah, there is. Yep. Every year we have to recertify. We got to spend $2 per capita on a tree program or a tree division. We have to have either a tree board or a division, forestry division, which we have in Cheyenne. We have to have a plan for the upcoming year, and we have to celebrate Arbor Day. So those are the basic requirements of Tree City.
Thank you.
Sure. And boy, off the top of my head, I'm not sure how many we have in Wyoming right now, but there's, I saw Tara was on board here. Tara, do you know how many there are?
We have 30 that are currently recertified for 2020. I'm hoping that number goes up a little bit more in the next month.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thanks, Tara. Tara works for the State Forestry Division, so I might call on you more, Tara, throughout the presentation. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, no problem.
Let's see. We've also got a tree house. It's pictured here. It was designed after the tree house in Nebraska City, the home of Arbor Day, which is a really cool place. If you've never been, it's like Disney World for tree enthusiasts. So I highly recommend it. But if you haven't been to our tree house, it's pretty cool. You can walk up the different levels, and we explain the different levels of the tree, from the roots to the trunk to the crown. Great for kids. We've got a website. Oh, skipped one. The Tree Walk. We have a tree walk in Lions Park with signs, a map, describes the trees along the walk. Most of them are doing well. We're also, we've got a new brochure coming out on the tree walk. We're asking for photos of Lions Park right now. We're having a competition. The winning photo will go on the cover of the brochure. Got a website, CheyenneTrees.com. Unfortunately, it's not very good, but there is some good information there. Whoa. Here come my kids. Hey, buddy. How you doing? Okay, we also have several events. We do Arbor Day every year. We've got a Treetoberfest, which we give in the fall for the Latchkey program, the city Latchkey program, which is our daycare program. We also put on a green industry workshop for professionals in the green industry. Many of you probably have been involved with that. I hope. We do invite master gardeners, of course, to attend. And then we've got 2 Rooted in Cheyenne planting events that we have, one in the spring and one in the fall. Hi, buddy. How you doing? You gonna go have some pizza?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Go on up. All right. Let's see our staff. We've got about a staff of 10 right now, including 8 full-time certified arborists. And typically we have 4 to 5 seasonals. So
Hey, Mark,
yes,
would you talk a little bit more about Rooted in Cheyenne? Unless that's on your agenda already, because I think that's
It is.
just a very cool program that you're doing. And the Master Gardeners, we kind of indirectly support that.
you bet. So yes, I am going to talk more about Rooted in Cheyenne. I've got several slides and actually a video. So thank you, Catherine, though. So some of the things that we do as a forestry division in Cheyenne, we plant a lot of trees. We plant about 400 to 500 trees a year. We do a lot of mulching. We've got a lot of dryland trees. Sorry, my kid's throwing a fit right now. So we, a lot of our seasonals spend a lot of their time mulching trees. There's a lot of benefits of mulch, which we're going to talk about more coming up. We manage insects and disease. Right now, the one that's kind of working us over a little bit is spruce ips beetle. So we've been spraying to protect our spruce trees from infestation. On city property, they've been primarily attacking our dryland spruce trees that are stressed. We also manage all those landscaped areas in Cheyenne on city property that have perennials and shrubs and flowers and those types of things. And then, of course, we spend a lot of time pruning those 14,000 trees we have on city property. We've got a lot of equipment. We've got about 3 bucket trucks, we've got a log loader, a couple chippers, but we also do climbing as well in areas that we can't get our bucket trucks to. This is on the golf course where can't get bucket trucks due to rutting that we might do on the turf, and so we have to climb those trees. Also do a lot of removals, unfortunately, and so you can see one of our staff spiking a spruce tree in the cemetery, and then another one doing a removal along a street in downtown. So our arborists are trained to do all kinds of work. We don't contract out a lot of our work, so they're expected to do the full gamut of work. We also do emergency work. We always have one arborist on call 24/7. And in Cheyenne, due to the high number of weak wooded trees, such as cottonwood, we do get a lot of failures. So we often see cottonwoods fail and crush cars and other objects. But we have to come in and clean up the mess, make sure we keep the roads open and the sidewalks open for the public. Okay, I'll take some questions right now if anybody has some. That was kind of my first section on urban, on our division, what we do. Any questions?
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned dryland trees. I'm assuming you're referring to trees that are being grown in a non-irrigated landscape, but what would your definition of dryland trees be?
Yeah, well, dryland trees to us are those trees that are planted and watered during establishment period. So typically 2 to 3 years, and then they're kind of on their own after that. And so we've got dryland areas in Lions Park, along the Greenway, in our golf courses. We do try to water them, once in a while if we have the time, but for the most part, they're on their own. And so there's only a limited number of species that really can survive in Cheyenne under those conditions.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else?
Yeah, you mentioned that the trees can reduce maintenance costs of, did you say streets and sidewalks? I'm just curious about how they might.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, there's been several studies about trees providing shade that in turn reduces the wear to sidewalks and streets just from the sun. So shading does that, cooling the area. So yeah, that's one of the arguments we use, you know, when we're trying to promote street trees to city government, for instance, to public works, that sort of thing.
So to clarify, none of the trees that are grown here in Cheyenne have a problem with the roots uprooting the sidewalk and breaking it and things like that? Because
Oh, they
from
do.
the south,
Yeah.
you have that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, we have it here too. Cottonwood is definitely
Cottonwood's one of those.
one that, you know, that has a lot of roots near the surface that will do damage to sidewalks and curb.
Okay. Thank you.
But we live with it because we love cottonwood, right?
Okay.
Okay, we'll keep moving on here. I don't know how many people, go ahead.
Tara tossed in the tree, silver maples.
Ah,
Just say no to silver maples, please.
yeah, they're, I don't know if we're going to talk about silver maple. So, you know, it's a shorter lived species. It doesn't like our alkaline soils, doesn't like high pH. Gets to be a pretty good sized tree in Cheyenne, but it's one I wouldn't recommend. It's really not readily available anymore in the nursery industry. There are crosses with it that we'll probably talk about. But it's one I wouldn't recommend in most cases. Okay, we're going to get into a little bit about Cheyenne, the growing conditions we have here, the challenge that it is to grow trees here. As I mentioned, you know, I've lived in several Western states. I've lived in the upper Midwest, and I've never lived anywhere that has harder growing conditions for trees. There's no question Cheyenne is one of the most difficult places you'll ever live in terms of growing trees. Trees don't naturally live here, right? You know, when the first settlers came, the only trees in Cheyenne were along Crow Creek. So you have to take extra care when growing trees in Cheyenne. And the big one is watering, but there are a lot of other issues as well. We don't get a lot of natural precipitation. I believe in 2020, the airport reported, was it 10 inches of natural moisture, 10 or 12 inches?
10.
We normally get 16, so that's not much. You know, we're in a zone 4, zone 5 in terms of hardiness zone. So the hardiness zone is important when you're purchasing trees. You always want to purchase a tree at your hardiness zone, which in Cheyenne is 5, but I tend to go 4. So you want a 4 or below, and it should be able to withstand our cold temperatures. However, that's not the only thing you need to take into consideration. You need to look at whether the tree does well in high pH soils, in clay soils where we have high salt content, all these other things. So there's a number of factors, and we're going to get into the species that do well here, but just don't go down to Fort Collins and purchase a tree thinking that it's going to survive in Cheyenne. Don't go to Lowe's or Home Depot and just buy a tree there because you think it's going to live here. A lot of our big box stores carry trees that aren't suitable to Cheyenne, unfortunately. Ash, don't buy an ash. We're done planting ash for a while. So white ash, green ash, Manchurian ash, black ash. I wouldn't recommend any of them right now. We've got a lot of scale. Scale is what's pictured on the left there. And we've got lilac ash borer as well. But we know emerald ash borer is on the horizon. It's only 40 miles away in Fort Collins right now. So do not plant ash. We don't have an ordinance against planting ash. I still see it planted, but it's pretty rare anymore. So there's the largest emerald ash borer caught on record. It's a bouncing 8-pound EAB. It's caught in Minnesota. Haven't seen any that big yet in Cheyenne. I hope we never do, because that little devil could probably eat a tree in a day or so. Just kidding, of course. That was a friend of mine that actually, forester friend, dressed up in that costume for Halloween. Great costume. EAB. So you've probably heard about it. We are trapping for it. Doesn't mean we'll catch it. The traps really don't work that well. We've been branch sampling any ash that we prune or remove. We do sample the branches to try to find EAB. Luckily in Cheyenne, we don't have a lot of ash. We've got 5% on city property. About 15% of our street trees are ash, so that's the largest percentage. There's a lot of ash in the avenues, definitely. But on private property, it only represents about 5%. So it's about the 10th most common tree species in Cheyenne. So really we're in good shape as far as our ash total or percentage. There are a lot of communities that are in the 20 to 40% range who are in a lot worse shape than we are. Doesn't mean that, it's going to be a big impact either way. So we are preparing for it. We have a management plan. We've been evaluating our ash trees and either cutting them down and replacing them or preparing to treat them once we do get EAB. So any questions on emerald ash borer? Fire away.
Hi, what do you do to treat them?
There are a lot of chemicals available, a lot of pesticides available. There's ones you can buy at yourself and treat the tree yourself at a big box store. But what I recommend is, if you do have an ash and it's one that you want to save, it's in good health, it's fairly large, I'd recommend having an arborist do injections. And you can do injections every 2 to 3 years typically, and that'll protect your tree. The studies from the Midwest, the East Coast show that injections work a lot better than homeowner soil drenches. And so that's the route I would go. That's what we're planning on doing. We've purchased an injection system and we've been using it already, not on ash, not for emerald ash borer yet, but we're getting ready, definitely.
So Mark, are you guys going to put together another ash tree walk and have a bunch of us get together and look at ash trees again, or have citizens call you in to have their trees looked at?
Yeah, I think so. If we get another intern this summer, I think we probably will. That went over pretty well, and it was a great opportunity for us to educate the public on EAB and really on species diversity. So yeah, I think we definitely try to do that again. And just so all of you know, that was a service that we offered to the public last year, and Catherine and the State Forestry Division and the Conservation District and ourselves kind of partnered, and we offered ash evaluations to citizens across Cheyenne.
It was very entertaining, some of the stuff we got to see.
Yes, it was. Okay, any other questions before I move on?
Yeah, Mark, on that map, what are the different colored dots? The overhead view?
Sure, yep. So we have a tree inventory system called Tree Plotter. It's an online tree inventory that you guys can actually view yourself if you go to our website. And I believe that all the dots represent trees that have been inventoried. And I think I may have had species filtered here. And so you're seeing the different colors represent different tree species in this case. Okay, we're going to go into a little more on EAB before we head into Rooted in Cheyenne. So tree diversity. Tree diversity is so important when there's an insect or disease that is reaching the status of EAB or Dutch elm disease. So what we've learned is that we just can't plant the same species, one species block after block in our cities, because if we get a disease or we get an insect that's specific to that tree species or genus, then it can wipe out our entire neighborhood. And so a lot of communities are setting guidelines for species diversity. And so we have requirements, in new development for species diversity. As far as our city tree planting efforts, we try to plant a wide variety of species, so we don't get in a situation where we have to cut down a large percentage of our community forest. In the case of Cheyenne right now, we've got 20% invested in cottonwood. So if something came along that was specific to cottonwood and just devastated that species, we'd be in a world of hurt. And so we're trying to diversify our species more, so we don't have any more than 10% in any one family, 5% in any one species, for instance. So what can you do as far as EAB goes? Don't move firewood, of course. If you're going to go camping, buy your firewood wherever you're camping. That's how we've seen EAB transported or moved from city to city in the most part. Because we don't have native ash forests between our communities, people are going to be the spreader. And in Cheyenne, we've got I-80, I-25, 2 railroads, all the tourists coming through. That's likely the way it's going to get here. Keep an eye on your ash trees. If you suspect you have EAB, call us at City Forestry or call a licensed arborist. As I mentioned, if you're going to replace your ash tree, don't plant ash, and consider planting with a variety of species. Don't plant something you've already got on your property. Roll the dice and try a different species. So as a result of EAB and our Emerald Ash Borer Management Plan in Cheyenne, we decided we wanted to start a program that would help homeowners replant their ash trees. And so 4 years ago, we started Rooted in Cheyenne, and was a private public partnership. It's been a nonprofit since 2018. It's a street tree planting program where if you're a resident of Cheyenne, you can get a tree for $50 planted along your street or sidewalk. You can get up to 2 trees per planting. We do a spring and fall planting, and we plant the tree and we maintain it for a year, which includes watering. We use volunteers to do the planting and the watering. We have a no-cost program as well for those that qualify, lower-income individuals. It's funded by sponsors. We've got half a dozen to a dozen sponsors every year. Let's see, we've got a website, rootedincheyenne.com, where you can apply to get a tree planted at your property or to volunteer. Let's see. In Cheyenne, we've had a community tree planting effort since our early days. Pictured here is James Floyd Jenkins. He moved to Cheyenne in the late 1800s from Wisconsin, and started a community tree planting effort back then. He raised money from businesses. He got volunteers together, and they planted a lot of our old streets. This is Cary. This is one of the streets that they planted, as you can see, primarily with just cottonwood that they got from our riparian areas. But this type of program, you know, got started a long time ago, and we're just really recreating this program that was started by this gentleman. He's actually got an autobiography that's pretty cool. If you're into history, he did a lot of neat things. He worked out at at Fort D.A. Russell before it was F.E. Warren. His brother was one of the first attorney generals in our area. So anyway, we've got his biography on the Rooted in Cheyenne website if you're interested. Street trees improve neighborhoods, there's no question. Would you rather live in the neighborhood on the left, which is Powell, Wyoming, or would you like to live on the one on the right, right? I'll take the one on my left myself. You know, I'm a tree guy, but property values are definitely going to be better, with homes on the left. Watering needs for the lawn are going to be reduced. You know, there's a lot of other benefits that go along with tree planting that neighborhood on the right are not going to see, unfortunately, and that's Rock Springs, where they don't have requirements for tree planting in residential neighborhoods. In Cheyenne, we do require street trees in residential neighborhoods, which is a good thing. And we do require now detached sidewalks, which is huge. Detached sidewalks provide that space for street trees. And in this picture from Rock Springs, what you have is you have an attached sidewalk. Then you have a utility corridor, which is about 10 feet wide. And so now your street tree is up against the house, basically, because you can't plant it anywhere else. So what we've seen, and I tend to get off on a tangent on this subject, but what we've seen with newer development across our country is we've gone to attached sidewalks because it's cheaper for the developer. But what we found is that now we've made our neighborhoods less livable, less healthy. And so we've gone back now to the old way of doing it. We've gone back to detached sidewalks and tree lawns and boulevards, which is a good thing, in my opinion. So Rooted in Cheyenne's got a volunteer board of about 10 or so volunteers. We got our first donation from Historic Cheyenne Inc. of $25,000. We haven't got a donation that big since, unfortunately, but they really helped us get the ball rolling. These are some of the sponsors we have this year, I believe. But we've got a good mix of sponsors, typically, organizations that are interested in trees and conservation, local businesses, nonprofits, that sort of thing. If there are sponsors out there that you think might want to support us, please let me know. There's my quick pitch on raising money for Rooted. We do have a website. So if you're interested in volunteering, if you want to apply for a tree, you can go to our website to do that. We do have a Facebook page that we, routine post on that site daily. A lot of educational, informational stuff, videos, that sort of thing. We've actually planted over 720 trees now throughout our community. And this is kind of what it looks like on planting day. We plant 8 to 10 foot, 15 gallon, 1.25 inch, 1.5 inch caliper trees that cost us about $150. So good quality nursery stock. Volunteers are really the backbone of the program. I don't know if any of you know Dennis Hemmer, the man pictured on the left there, but he was one of our first diehard volunteers. This guy purchased a trailer so he could water trees for us. He was a long time employee of the local conservation district. He was their tree specialist, but he didn't like watering with a trailer, so he went out and bought a pickup truck specifically for watering trees for Rooted in Cheyenne. Unfortunately, he got cancer and died pretty unexpectedly, pretty rapidly. But he donated his truck to us, and so we've now got about a dozen volunteers that use that truck to water our 200 or so trees that we water annually. And he really got the ball rolling for us for our volunteer effort. So we'll be forever indebted to him, and that's his wife there. Okay, any questions on Rooted in Cheyenne? I'm going to try to do a video here in a second, but I thought I'd take questions on Rooted. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Is it only it's only inside the city of Cheyenne, correct?
Yep, just city residents as of now. We're hoping to, expand our program at some point, but we haven't yet.
Thank you.
I was confused about what you said about the cost to the public of the trees. You said those are $150 trees, but something about $50 for a person to have one planted in their yard?
Yeah, so the trees and the planting supplies cost us about $150. We sell the tree to the homeowner for $50, and then sponsors and donors cover the remaining $100. So you're getting a tree for about a third of the cost. Plus we're planting it, and I'm not adding in the cost of planting it and taking care of it for a year. So it's a great deal to homeowners in Cheyenne. Any other questions before we go to the video?
Just to clarify, because of the newer subdivisions with those large easements next to the sidewalks or next to the streets, you don't, Rooted in Cheyenne does not plant trees in those particular yards, or do they go past the easement and plant?
Yeah, so when the house is first built, the builder is required to plant in those sections. But oftentimes those trees don't make it, and so we will plant in those areas, but we're not going to be the first one to plant those areas because the city requires the builder to do it.
Okay.
But yeah, we've been planting in the Point, in Saddle Ridge, in Thomas Heights, a lot of new subdivisions.
Okay, thank you.
So about a year ago, I seen Rooted in Cheyenne planting trees around the city, and I was like, hey, what's that all about? So I went online, found out the information, and then I went and I applied to get some trees. I had just bought this property just over a year ago, and I knew I wanted more trees around it, but also when I found out it was a community program where I could get volunteers to help me with the trees for a year, because I've never grown a tree in my life. So it was a big deal for me to have that. And so I applied, and they came out and checked my property, and they said you could have 2 new trees. So I chose 2 trees. I wanted 2 that would, I'm originally from Wisconsin, would change colors in the fall a little. So I went with a Ohio buckeye. And then also I found out I could volunteer. So in the afternoon today, I'm gonna go out and help plant trees. I wanted to be part of the program. I liked that it was helping people in the community, as well as improve or get more trees in the city. I just think more people should do this, especially if your property needs some trees. It's pretty painless. You just apply, it's quick. They got back to me right away, looked at my property, marked it out, and helped me find the trees that would work here best for me and this property.
Well, it's a great deal.
Well, it first got started when Mark Ellison from Rooted in Cheyenne came and gave a talk to our Noon Rotary Club. He talked about this program, and many Rotarians were very interested in supporting it. And we were fortunate enough to get a Rotary District grant to help purchase trees for Rooted in Cheyenne.
This program's was started about 2 years ago. It actually was started by City Forestry with a volunteer board. The importance of it is to start planting more trees in Cheyenne, in the city of Cheyenne in particular. We have a lot of properties that don't have trees on them, street trees that are being removed and need to be replaced. This is a program to start that effort. And so this is our second year doing this. We're planting about 130 trees today. For a spring planting, we'll be doing an equal amount probably in the fall for a fall planting. It's a program where property owners can pay $50 for a tree. We go out, buy the tree, plant it, and water it for a year for the homeowner.
And it fits in with the Rotary theme this year, planting the tree for every Rotarian across the globe. So this was a great opportunity for the Rotary Club to get involved to support this cause.
Well, it was just awesome this morning to see just an incredible amount of volunteers come out, good teams from local businesses who do a lot of landscaping and tree planting and just planting some trees in some spots that maybe needed them. We were just digging up a couple roots from old trees that had fallen over next to some beautiful old trees, but just to see new trees going in. I mean, it happens fast. I think when it's this cold and it's this rainy, people work quick, they dig deep, but it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's a good system, and you think about the value for the homeowner, just to be able to put a tree in the ground for $50 that's going to grow over the course of 50 years, maybe 100 years, but the city is going to stake it, we water it, we mulch it, and it's ready to go for people that want this. So Rooted in Cheyenne, it's pretty neat. It was fun today, cold but fun.
We have a great group of sponsors, businesses around town that provide us with food or supplies for planting the trees. It takes a lot of equipment. It takes a lot of material to plant the trees. And so we couldn't do this without our sponsors. So it's just, I think it's a great opportunity for people to get involved and do something.
What it means to plant a tree is to invest not only in a living.
Okay, is everyone still here?
We're still here, yeah.
All right, I got a piece of pizza while the video was going, so hopefully I don't have pizza sauce on me. Okay, we're going to get into tree species now. So we're going to talk about tree species that do well in Cheyenne that I would recommend. And we're going to start with deciduous shade trees. So the Plains cottonwood is our state tree. It does very well in Cheyenne. These trees are pictured are in Lyons Park, right next to Sloan's Lake. The one thing you want to be careful about if you're going to purchase a cottonwood is that you get either a Plains cottonwood, which typically is a Sargent Straight. That's the one that's available in the nursery industry. It's called a Sargent Straight cottonwood. Or you could get a Lance Leaf, which is a cross between a Plains cottonwood and a narrowleaf cottonwood. The other cottonwood varieties just really aren't suitable to Cheyenne. They're short-lived. They have several problems. Narrowleaf cottonwood, although it's native, has a very shallow root system. There's also a lot of poplars as well that are pretty short-lived and pretty junky. So if you're going to get a cottonwood, get the Sargent Straight. If you can't get that one, then I'd get the Lance Leaf. Here is the state champion Eastern cottonwood. This thing is massive. Eastern cottonwood is a relative to the Plains cottonwood. Don't have a picture of the Plains, unfortunately. Bur oak, this is one I talked about earlier. Great tree, probably the best oak for our area, native to the Black Hills. Bit of a slow grower early on, but once it becomes established, it does grow pretty rapidly and keeps up with other shade trees in terms of growth rate. There's nothing real flashy about it, but it is a really tough, long-lived tree. This is the former state champion in Cody, Wyoming. And this is the Colorado state champion in Denver. So as you can see, this tree doesn't get real tall. It gets extremely wide though. I mean, it might be 50 feet tall and have a 50 or 60 foot spread, you know, this tree in Denver. So pretty cool tree. Hackberry. Hackberry is one that in other parts of the country, they might not like or roll their eyes at, but in Cheyenne, we love it because it's tough. Similar to an elm. What else can I say about it? It does really well in the downtown. It does have fruit on it that birds do love. Very drought tolerant, does well in alkaline soils. This is a picture from Gearing, Nebraska. They love hackberry and Gearing because they've got really high pH there. They have higher pH than we do in Cheyenne, and yet hackberry just thrives there. So great tree. American linden, another great tree for Cheyenne. That's the state champion in Casper on the left. You can see it's got large heart-shaped leaves. Bees love it. It has very fragrant flowers in early summer. It's an upright growing tree. It's kind of pyramidal. This is one growing in Fort Collins. Gorgeous tree. Norway maple. Norway maple is obviously not a native, but it does well in Cheyenne. It does get sun scald or frost cracking on the stem early on, and so if you can plant it in a shadier area, it will do better there. You can also wrap the trunk during the first 5 years or so after you plant it. There's several Norway maple varieties that do good. Emerald Queen, Emerald Buster are a couple that we like. We also like Deborah, but there are dozens of Norway maple varieties. It is a noxious weed in other parts of the country, but not in Cheyenne or Wyoming for that matter. This is one in Cheyenne. You can see it has a really spreading crown to it. Buckeye horse chestnut, this is one of my favorites. You can see it actually gets some good fall color. In Cheyenne, we have very few tree species that get red or orange fall color. So this is one of the few. It's definitely more stunted in terms of its size in Cheyenne. You know, growing up in the Midwest, you'd find buckeye or horse chestnut in the 60, 70 foot range. Here, you're not going to find one over 40 feet. So it is a smaller shade tree. Pretty unique bark though. Definitely a cool tree. Tough tree too, as you can see. Here's one growing in a 3x3 cutout in a sidewalk in downtown Billings and doing just fine. Here's one at our VA center. They've got several older ones there. You can see the bark is pretty unique. Large palmate compound leaves. Kentucky coffee tree is one I've just been struggling with in Cheyenne. I just don't understand why we can't grow it. Does so well along the Front Range of Colorado, does well in other Wyoming communities. It might be related to our elevation. There are some older ones in the avenues, but they're pretty short in stature. So Kentucky coffee tree is not one I'm super high on. Unfortunately, it's really cool tree. This is the state champion in Casper, but just seems to struggle here in Cheyenne. And I have planted my share of them in Cheyenne, and I just don't know what the problem is. Let's see, honey locust. Honey locust is definitely a good shade tree. It's becoming a bit overplanted, I'd say. This is kind of the go-to shade tree right now. So we got to be careful we don't overplant it. There's several varieties there that are listed that do well in Cheyenne. The only one that doesn't is, I can't think of the name of it, but the one that has the yellow leaves, Sunburst, I believe is the name of it. Sensation box elder. This is a box elder that doesn't produce the seeds, so it doesn't attract box elder bugs. However, it's still a box elder. You know, there are problems with box elder. It's weak wooded. It does tend to get sun scald and frost cracking on the stem. But overall, a good tree. I've got one in my front yard. Some days I love it. Some days I hate it. Does have nice fall color. It did die back early on during that 14 polar vortex. The top died out of it, but I pruned it up, and it's ugly, but it's alive. And so, you know, in Cheyenne, you can't be picky. You know, an alive tree is a good tree as far as I'm concerned. So it is fairly rapid growing as well, which is a good thing. Asian elms, we've got several Asian elms that do well in Cheyenne. The Accolade is definitely the best, I think. I've planted a lot of them, and Accolade has done the best, I think. So if you're looking for a fast growing tree that's going to require a lot of pruning, this is your tree. A couple other varieties, cultivars to try: Triumph, New Horizon, Discovery. Those are all pretty good. Not as good as Accolade in my opinion, but good. American elm. There's a lot of American elm now that are resistant to Dutch elm disease. So the ones we've been planting that I've liked so far, Princeton and Prairie Expedition. I really like the Prairie Expedition. It's similar to Accolade, but it's hard to get in the nursery industry. But that's probably my favorite. Again, this is a very fast growing tree. Tends to have narrow branch angles, which can be a problem. They do require a lot of structural pruning. So when the tree is young, you establish a strong branch structure. But who doesn't love an American elm, right? Here's a beautiful American elm growing in Lions Park. One of my favorite trees. Any questions on shade trees before we go into ornamentals? Are there
Mark, just a quick question here. What does wrapping the trunk accomplish for new trees?
Well, it protects them from sun scald or frost cracking. And that's just the phenomenon, you know, on a warm day, even deciduous trees that are in dormancy during the winter aren't completely dormant, and they will transpire. They will pull water up through the stem, out through the branches, and that water can freeze later in the day, you know, early evening, late evening. And so that's what can happen by wrapping them. You tend to protect them from that. Doesn't always help. We don't wrap our trees, you know, because we have too many, we can't do that kind of intensive management. But for homeowners, it's a good idea, especially if you've got a maple, a linden, box elder, those species in particular.
Okay, so purple ash trees, they're still in the same genus, right?
Yep.
Yep, not recommending them.
Yeah, autumn purple ash, it's a, you know, nice tree, very hardy to Cheyenne, but it's a white ash. It's, you know, once we get EAB, it's going to be vulnerable, and so you'd have to treat it, you know, if you wanted it to survive. So I wouldn't plant it myself.
What qualifies something as a shade tree? Is just the size?
Yeah, so it'd be a larger deciduous tree. Okay, we'll move into ornamental deciduous trees now. All the trees that I've got pictured here do well in Cheyenne. Spring snow crabapple is probably the most planted crabapple we've got. It's becoming a bit overplanted. It does say in the nursery guides that it has fair to good resistance to fire blight. However, in Cheyenne, due to all our hail, you know, hail creates wounds on the branches, and then the fire blight bacteria can get into those branches and affect the branches, causing them to die back. And so we see a lot of fire blight in spring snow. So even though it has pretty good resistance because of our occurrence of hail, you know, it's one that I wouldn't overplant. You know, we plant a few of them every year, but we don't plant a lot of them because they tend to get fire blight. And when Depot Square was built, they planted the entire Depot Square with this tree, and now all of them have fire blight, and every year we're removing 2 to 3 trees. And so that's unfortunate. You never want to plant a single variety, single species, as I've said several times already. Here's another crabapple. This one does very well in Cheyenne, and as you can see, it has reddish pink flowers. There are just so many crab apples. It's hard to cover them all. Prairie Fire is another one that does very well. I'm going to kind of pick up the pace here if you don't mind. Thunder Child is another one. A few hawthorns that do well in Cheyenne. Crimson Cloud is one that's probably underplanted. Doesn't get enough respect, but it's one of my favorite hawthorns. Has red flowers as opposed to white. Toba hawthorn is another one. This is probably the one that's planted the most in the hawthorn group. Has white flowers. Has really cool bark, kind of yellow, orangey, gets gnarly bark. Oak leaf mountain ash, not a true ash, so does not attract the emerald ash borer. Oak leaf mountain ash was developed at the research station west of town. One of my favorite mountain ash. Hot wings to Tyrian maple. This is one that's becoming overplanted. It's kind of the hot ornamental tree right now, and you can see why with those red samaras. Beautiful tree. is kind of weak wooded, doesn't really stand up very good to heavy snow loads, as we found. Got to talk about the questionable trees, the junk, you know, the dirty stepchild trees. Autumn blaze maple is still being planted in Cheyenne like crazy. It's a cross between a red maple and a silver maple. Both those species struggle in Cheyenne. Doesn't like our alkaline soils, but you'll see it in new developments all the time because it has red fall color. Everybody wants red fall color. This is one that'll give it to you, but it'll give it to you for about 5 years and then it's dead. So don't get suckered into that one. Lombardy poplar is the one pictured here. Actually, that's Boliana poplar. Both are just junk. Don't buy those. Silver poplar, another one that is very hazardous because it gets very large, very fast, very weak wooded. Fall gold black ash, junky tree, an ash tree. Will get EAB, and then just willows in general. I wouldn't plant in an urban setting. If you live out in the country, you know, they are suitable for riparian areas. But anybody want to add anybody got a tree that think it should be on the junky list or the questionable list?
Yeah, the os trees that are advertised in the Sunday newspaper. Yeah,
Good. Yes.
I've seen them out here. I've come across them.
Yep. Yeah, they were really popular in the Bighorn Basin where I used to work. I don't know, they must have had a salesman that went through that area and sold them to people, unfortunately. Okay, any questions on ornamentals? Okay. I'm not going to get into conifers too much in this presentation, but in Cheyenne, we have overplanted spruce. This was in Laramie actually, but this is on a street corner. People think spruce are just going to stay these nice little Christmas trees, but they actually grow to be huge trees, right? A spruce at the base, you know, is going to be 20 to 30 feet wide. It's a pyramidal tree, so it gets smaller as you go up, but at the base, right, these trees are going to be halfway out, or these branches are going to be halfway out in the street there. So this is something we got to remember. You know, if you guys go on house calls and people are saying, you know, where should I plant my spruce? Not right next to the sidewalk, right? Not next to the driveway, not next to the house. Give yourself some space with spruce. You need at least 30 feet. Okay, some of the alternatives to spruce that we should be planting more of, white fir, Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, Austrian pine, limber pine, Black Hill spruce. Norway spruce is one that's definitely underplanted that does pretty well in Cheyenne. And European larch is one that does so-so in Cheyenne, but I'd like to see more people try it. Anybody have questions on conifers? Sorry, I'm not giving conifers their due here, but does anybody?
Yes, which are the spruce that are overplanted if that's not the Norway and the Black Hills?
Right, Colorado blue spruce is the one that, yeah, we've overplanted, definitely. It's not a bad tree. It is drought tolerant. It, you know, doesn't have the extensive root system that a ponderosa pine has, but you know, I gotta admit, spruce is pretty tough. It's just that, you know, we shouldn't be planting one species. You know, if you look at our cemetery, gosh, we planted hundreds and hundreds of just spruce in our cemetery. And then we started using recycled water in our parks, and that, you know, that affected the spruce. And then we got Ips beetle, and that affect, you know, so you just don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
Hey, Mark, the European larch, is that the one that's at the at Lions Park?
No, that's the Western larch.
Okay.
And that one does okay. European is a little bigger tree. We've tried it and it's done pretty well, but it's I would say it's still in the experimental stage in Cheyenne.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's see, where am I going with this? Oh yeah, okay. Sorry. Okay, some of the benefits of trees, we've talked about some of them already. We're going to get into planting. Why would you plant a tree? You know, why should I invest in a tree? What's it going to do for me, type of thing. There's a lot of environmental benefits. It reduces trees reduce stormwater runoff. They improve water quality, reduce air pollution, right? They take in carbon dioxide, they produce oxygen. There's wildlife habitat associated with trees, of course. There's a lot of social benefits that we're learning more and more about, health benefits. Trees make communities safer, more livable. And of course, there's economic benefits, right? Trees shade houses, they reduce cooling costs, they protect your house from hail, from wind, so they reduce heating costs. Property values are increased where you have mature, nice trees. They say up to 20%. They attract business. So there's a lot of savings to the community. So we're going to go into planting next. First thing is, before you plant a tree, you have to buy the tree, of course. So what are you going to purchase? First, you want to make sure that the tree is hardy to Cheyenne. So you want to make sure it's a zone 5 or less rated tree. You want to make sure it doesn't have any insect or disease issues, such as ash do right now with emerald ash borer. You want to make sure the tree is healthy and vigorous. It has good form, has an adequate root ball. Make sure the roots are in good condition. When I'm looking for a potted tree, I'll often pull the tree out of the pot when the salesperson isn't looking to make sure the roots aren't circling and that they're healthy looking. These are, of course, nice looking trees. These are trees grown in a nursery environment. You can see they have nice form to them. They look healthy. There isn't damage to the stem, that sort of thing. Next thing, once you buy that beautiful tree, you want to make sure you plant it properly. So you want to find the root flare, and I'm going to show you a video here in a minute, but you want to find the root flare. So pictured on the bottom, this is a B&B tree. Often the root flare is buried in the root ball, as pictured on the right. You can see the root flare is where we go from trunk to roots. So it's kind of where the flare is, where the stem transitions to the root system. So that's where you want to plant the tree, at the soil level or just above. And so what we often have to do is dig down into the root ball to find that flare. If they're circling roots, you want to treat those. As you can see pictured on the right there, we've got tremendous circling roots. If you were to plant that tree, those roots are just going to continue to circle in the planting hole, and it's going to take a long time for that tree to establish. It might girdle the stem eventually. It might get blown over because the roots aren't growing out into the native soil. There's a lot of negatives to circling roots. And typically we try to plant the tree 1 to 2 inches above ground level, above that root flare. So this is what I often see in large plantings in Cheyenne. Unfortunately, you go out to a site, I have to inspect a lot of new tree planting projects in big developments. And what you find is that you dig down and you can tell where the nursery grown soil is because it's nice and black, and our soil is that ugly clay or light colored soil. So they've put native soil on top of the root ball, which is a no-no. You don't see a flare there per se on that stem. And so it makes me wonder, where's the root flare? How come they didn't find it in the root ball? And then pictured on the right, you see those circling roots. You dig down and look at that. The tree, hasn't become established because the roots are just continuing to circle. And so these problems just continue after the tree's planted in the field, and these trees just never become established. And it's very common. Unfortunately, some of our, landscapers just don't take the time to plant the trees properly. It takes time to do it right, and they don't want to take the time. So here's a B&B tree. You can see it's better to dig a wide hole. The more soil that you can work up around the root ball, the sooner the roots are going to be able to penetrate that soil and get established into the native soil. So the wider the hole you can dig, the better. The tree pictured on the right, they just dug a hole just wide enough so they could shoehorn that root ball in there. So you don't want to do that. You'd like to keep the grass away from the root system as much as possible. So this is kind of what the tree should look like. This is just a diagram, that the pros use. So you want to make sure you remove all the packing material. You don't want to leave bamboo on the tree, for instance. Cut those circling roots. Don't amend the soil unless you're going to amend the whole area, the whole rooting area that the tree's going to root into. Water when backfilling. Consider a basin. If you've got some extra soil left over, you can build a mound of kind of around the root ball to hold the water in. Mulch, stake, and protect the tree. So in Cheyenne, we typically stake the tree with 3 stakes just because of our high wind, but 2 is probably adequate in most cases. But trying to keep that grass away from the root system is real important. So putting down mulch, either wood chips or bark or even rock is better than nothing. So I think I'm gonna do a tree planting video real quick here, and then I'll take questions on planting. If I can remember where I put it.
Planting a tree is a fun and rewarding activity. However, to ensure your tree thrives in its new location, Rooted in Cheyenne recommends you follow these tree planting steps. First, remove the grass in the area to be planted. Turf grass is a fierce competitor and will greatly restrict the tree's ability to take up water and nutrients if not removed. Create a circular cutout that's at least 2.5 times the width of the tree's root ball. A 4-foot wide cutout is a good rule of thumb. Dig a wide hole, but not too deep. Remove the tree from the container and find the root flare, which is where the stem flares out and transitions to the roots. You may need to remove several inches of soil from the top of the root ball. Once you find the root flare, measure the bottom of the root flare to the bottom of the root ball and dig the hole to that depth, so the root flare will be just above the soil line when planted. Check the root ball for circling roots. Circling roots are very common in containerized trees. If circling roots exist, cut roots horizontally down through the root ball on 4 sides with a pruning saw or reciprocating saw. Only cut into the root ball enough to sever all circling roots. If this step is skipped, circling roots will continue to circle in the hole and prevent the tree from becoming wind firm and could also girdle the stem. If the tree was tied up for transport, remove the twine and other ties or tags that could girdle the tree's branches. Be careful not to cut into the bark or break any branches. Next, plant the tree. Place the root ball in the bottom of the hole. If planting between the sidewalk and the street, be sure the stem is in the center of the boulevard. Use a measuring tape to check. Lay a post or shovel across the hole to confirm the depth is correct. The trunk flare should be at or just above the soil line. Make any adjustments to the hole if necessary. Backfill around the root ball and straighten up the tree. While backfilling, water the root ball and planting hole and gently compress the soil around the root ball. Push off any backfilled soil that was inadvertently placed on top of the root ball. If excess soil exists after backfilling the hole, mound the soil around the root ball to form a circular dam to hold excess water. Evenly spread 2 to 3 inches of wood chip or bark mulch over the entire planting area. Do not apply excess mulch or pile it around the stem. Rock mulch can be used as a substitute. However, wood mulch improves soil conditions as it decomposes. The downside is wood mulch will need to be reapplied on a yearly basis. Next, stake the tree to prevent it from blowing over and exposing the root system. Drive posts into the ground on opposite sides of the stem and parallel to the street. Make sure posts are just outside the planting hole and are driven in vertically. Put one strap with the grommets around the stem and run the arbor tie through the grommets and tie off. Run the other end of the arbor tie to the post and nail to secure. Repeat this procedure with the second strap. Install the 20-gallon water bag by placing it around the stem and zipping it up. Fill the water bag by locating the fill hole, which is beneath the tag, and insert a garden hose to it. Be sure to fill the bag once per week during the growing season and once per month during the dormant season on days above 40 degrees. Lastly, be sure to remove any grass or weeds that seed into the mulched area, and be careful not to damage the stem with your string trimmer or lawnmower. Thanks for planting a tree in Cheyenne. You're improving your neighborhood and making our community greener and more livable. To learn more, go to rootedincheyenne.com.
Okay, so my name is Jason Hardy.
Okay, any questions on planting?
That water bag that they're using, I've never seen one of those before. Or is that just a common use that you guys do that for every tree? And is the trunk of the tree just living in that water? And does it just seep into the ground?
Yeah, so we have been providing a water bag with each tree we plant for Rooted in Cheyenne, just because it's easier to water that way, because it's simpler. You just fill up the bag. It does have 20 gallons, and so you fill up that bag once to twice a week, and that's plenty for a new tree. So the water doesn't contact the stem. The water the water is in the bag around the stem. That's not explaining it very well, but there's two small emitters, and it empties the bag in about six hours or so. So it's a great way to slowly water the tree, and works really well.
Can a person pick those up at like Menards or Home Depot? Because that's pretty clever. Those little tree bags.
No, you'd have to order them online. Just Google water bag and you'll find them. We use Tree Gators. I think Tree Gator is a little higher quality than some of the knockoffs.
Do you leave? How long do you leave those water bags on, and does that serve the same purpose as wrapping the trunk or not?
Yeah, it does protect the trunk, definitely. So we've been leaving them on year round now. So we'll fill them up once a month in the winter time too, on warm days. But yes, it will help with sun scald and frost cracking. It does prevent even critter damage. We get a lot of damage from rabbits and squirrels, and so the bags help prevent that as well. So there's several benefits to using those water bags.
Do you use the water bags on conifer new ones too?
You can, and I'll show you a picture coming up here. They make these lower profile type systems.
Thank you.
What about like tree diapers?
I haven't. I've seen them, but I've never tried them. That is a real thing, by the way. Some of you might be snickering, but that is a genuine product.
The stuff that's in there, the crystals, I've heard other people, they just sprinkle that in the hole when they plant it, and it's like it holds, the polymer that holds on to water. I've heard some people tell me that they've got really good results with it.
Yeah. It's something you could do. I'm not sold that it helps a lot, but there's other things too, mycorrhizae, but really the key is watering on a regular basis.
The tree bag seems like the best solution I've heard so far that for winter watering, because I am trying to wrap my head around how to do winter watering without it taking me days just to water all the trees with a hose once a month. And I mean, I don't know if you could, I don't know if you're going to address that at some other time, winter watering, like how to do it when your drip system is off. Because I'm pretty dumbfounded. I don't get how you can do it without like spending like all day.
Yeah, you're right. It takes time. The thing with the bags is, unfortunately, I've seen, you know, our volunteers will fill up a bag in the winter in the late afternoon, and then it freezes at night, and then you're stuck with, you know, a frozen bag for weeks because it takes forever to thaw out. So the bags in the winter, boy, you have to time them right because it takes 6 hours for all the water to go into the or out the bag. So bags may not be the best way to do it in the winter, but yeah, winter watering is so critical in Cheyenne with our winds. It just takes a lot of time and effort, definitely, but it's worth it.
I have one more question about planting trees. And I was reading somewhere, I think the High and Dry book, about this guy sort of rinses the nursery soil off of the roots of his plants when he plants them in to get the native soil like to get into contact with the roots. And I don't know if that's just for smaller perennials or if it's appropriate for trees or not. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, you know, there are some people that promote, you know, getting all the soil off of the roots just so you have a better look at the root system so you can tell what you've got. Sometimes there's layers of circling roots in potted grown trees. Trees, you know, they tend to move trees up. They have a system for moving trees up into different size containers. And so you might start them in a small container, move to a larger one, and that'll continue. And then so you might have layers of circling roots. And so there are some people that believe you should just get all the soil off so you can see the root system. As far as the native soil versus, you know, the nursery grown soil, you know, I'm not sure about that. You know, will a tree establish faster if you just put it, you know, get rid of the native or get rid of the nursery soil? It's hard to say. I don't know. Most trees from nurseries have a lot of fertilizer in them. So if you get rid of that nursery soil, you're getting rid of all that fertilizer, which might help, you know, your tree in terms of growth rate initially. So I don't know. I think the research and the verdict is still out on that.
Is a bald and burlap tree less likely to have the circling roots than when it's in a plastic container?
Yes. Yep. They usually don't have circling roots, but more often than not, the root flare is buried in a B&B tree. So you're going to have to dig down and find that root flare. And B&B are just so heavy and cumbersome for a homeowner to handle. You know, B&Bs are great for contractors with equipment to plant, but for, you know, homeowners, it's pretty tough, pretty hard to plant those big trees.
And what about bare root trees in terms of their sort of vigor and success? If you had to choose how you're going to buy your.
Mm-hmm. Bare roots are a little harder to come by. I mean, you can get them. You're going to have to order them primarily. There's not a lot of nurseries that sell bare root. There's nothing wrong with bare root. You just got to make sure you really protect that root system from drying out. So if you're transporting them, you know, you're wrapping them in burlap or in newspaper or sawdust, because once they dry out, those roots die or they desiccate immediately. And so, you know, we do plant bare root trees as well. They just take a little more care, you know, but again, you get to see what the root system looks like. There's nothing hiding the root system, you know, from possible problems. So yeah, I like planting bare root if you can find them.
Hey, Mark. When you
Yeah.
were showing the video and it was talking about the circling roots, they were actually taking like a hacksaw. Do you only do that to one side to break off the circling portion, like to have it have new growth? Like with plants, you just kind of tease the roots if they've been, bound in the pot. But with a tree, how susceptible can you get to aggressive,
Yeah. Good question. What we do is we do this box cut method, just how you saw in the video. Those roots in the video weren't really circling. We just did that for, for the benefit of the video. But what we'll do is we'll use a hand saw, or we'll use a reciprocating saw with a long blade, and we'll just cut 4 sides of it. Try to take an inch off. You don't want to take too much off. But what they found is that where you've made those cuts then is the roots will have all these fine root hairs, growing out from those cuts. And so you get a really nice response from the tree. It sends out all these fine root hairs from those places we made the cuts. They grow out into the soil, and you get a better root system than one that's just circling. And so I recommend, that box cut method. We used to just cut it in 4 or 5 different places, with a utility knife. But what the research is showing is that just doesn't cut it. You need to eliminate all of those circling roots.
So Mark, that doesn't kill the tree, because that just really still scares me. And I always treat deciduous tree roots and coniferous tree roots as though they were like china, and handle them delicately. So this is just this just messes with my head.
I know. The first time I did it, I felt pretty awful about it, but the trees respond very well. I mean, just picture, when you a tree that has a topping cut, where they indiscriminately cut off the top of the tree, you see all these sprouts come out like crazy. And that's what you see when you make this same type of cuts on the root system. You get a great response, and the fine roots are the ones you really want, because those are the ones that are able to, absorb the moisture.
Mark, I have a question. Do you, with your strong winds there in Wyoming, do you leave the stakes in longer than a year?
Yeah, we go 2 years typically.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hour and a half in. Is everyone doing okay? Should we keep going?
Keep going.
Keep going. Does anyone need a break, or
Need a 2-minute break?
a 2-minute run to the bathroom, or get a cup of tea break?
Yeah, 5-minute break.
Okay, a 5-minute break. Okay. 7:40. Let's come back at 7:40.
Yay, thank you.
Mark can take another bite of pizza.
Yes.
So Mark, you didn't mention the trees that are in Cheyenne that so many places have them, and they start out green with white flowers and then they turn purple. Are they Canadian cherries or something like that? Tell me about those.
Canada red cherries, the ones where the leaves, they come out green. The new growth is green, and then the older leaves are purple.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, we've lost a lot of those lately, just due to some of the crazy weather we've had, the fluctuations in temperature, drastic fluctuations. So yeah, we don't tend to plant those much. They sucker a lot at the base too, so they're a lot of work. It's one of those trees that would rather be a shrub, I think. Somebody tried to turn it into a tree and it really wants to be a shrub. There is a new variety or kind of related cultivar that's called sucker punch. It's called sucker punch choke cherry. It doesn't sucker at the base. It was actually developed in Fort Collins. So if you like that tree, that's the one I would get.
Yeah.
I was just looking at that one on the Rooted in Cheyenne website, and that looked
Yes.
very interesting.
That's true. We are selling that one for
We
this
moved
spring.
to a house that had one of those trees, and it has been amazing. It was 40 years old at least, and it was gigantic, beautiful. But when we had that terrible early freeze about 3 years ago, and then the snow, it just devastated it. So
Yeah.
it's so deformed now, and I feel like we should pull it out, but I just hesitate. The trunk is like, I don't know, 3 feet in diameter. It's just humongous, but it looks horrible now.
Yeah, don't feel bad. We've probably removed 30 of those trees over the last 2 years.
Oh, wow. So I guess I would suggest that we not replant that tree.
Yes. I would.
What about Russian olive trees?
Ooh. I hate
love
that
them
tree.
and I want some.
It's a state listed noxious weed, invasive species. So you can't plant it.
Right.
But it's one of those trees that's taken over a lot of our riparian areas. Not so much in Cheyenne, but in warmer climates. Like if you drive south into Colorado, you'll find Russian olives, just choking out a lot of their waterways. Or in other parts of Wyoming where it's warmer, it's a major problem.
My in-laws have one they live in Rolling Hills, which is by Glen Rock.
Yes.
And it does very well at their house, and no other trees do very well at all.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very tough. I mean, I wish they, it's too bad they couldn't, create one that didn't seed, because I mean, they put off so many seeds, and those seeds are eaten by birds. The birds transport them and deposit them in riparian areas, and they, outcompete native vegetation, and they just become a ecological disaster. And so I understand they are tough, and they'll do better than almost any tree under really difficult situations, but it's not worth it, in my opinion, to plant them because of those negative effects to the, our native ecosystems.
Yeah, they're causing huge problems up in the Bighorn Basin on some of the rivers up there where they're pushing out native trees and native habitat. And when you start pushing out the native trees and shrubs and grasses, then you start losing your native everything, native critters, little creatures. But it's very controversial because there's people that are on the rivers up there that don't want to get rid of the Russian trees, and they're tough. They're tough as nails. If you've got one in your yard, then it's not a problem. It's a great tree, except the thorns.
What about black locust? I'm trying to design like a shelter belt, and I'm looking for some ideas of what to grow our own firewood.
So black locust, and Mark, you can correct me on this, but those are sort of the Freddy Krueger of trees.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I've seen, like, apparently the young ones are just super nasty looking, but I heard they're really good firewood trees, and they'll, you can coppice them and they'll grow back.
Yeah, it's a weedy tree that, we don't plant just because, it's kind of junky, but it survives. What's kind of cool is on Snyder, like from 24th up to 30th in Cheyenne, there's an area of black locust, and black locust seeds as like crazy. And so it'll seed into gardens, into alleys. And so we've got a population of black locust in that neighborhood. And there's some really neat trees, some big ones, some really ratty, nasty looking. I mean, there's the full gamut, and they're thorny.
Any other suggestions for things to grow like out in the county for firewood purposes?
Siberian elms, Chinese elms.
If I were you, I'd go to the mountains and cut your firewood because it is so hard to grow trees in Wyoming. You're not going to grow things fast enough to generate much firewood.
Okay.
Up there.
Okay,
Yeah.
good to know. Thank you.
Nope. But there's plenty of wood, up in our national forest right now. Plenty of dead wood, beetle killed wood.
Yeah, there's down at a friend's house, there's a neighbor has a black locust and they pruned the black locust. They pruned it up, but that pruning wound, that pruning area, when it calloused over, it sent out thorns.
Ooh.
Thorns. I mean, this is like the nightmare tree on Elm Street.
Is there a danger of bringing wood down from the national forest and like infecting your trees with bark beetle?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because I don't want that.
Yeah, just make sure it's dead, completely dead, and you should be okay.
Yeah, you can peel off some of the bark or pop some of the bark off on a dead tree and just look and see, make sure there's nothing six-legged running around in there that's really tiny. Just check. But that during the whole bark beetle episode, that was a really big problem. And I did some yard calls and I called in, I had to call in help on it because some guy brought down fresh lodgepole pines that he'd cut up in the mountains that hadn't died from mountain pine beetle. And he had stacked them up and they were stacked about 6 feet tall. And they had active mountain pine beetle on them. And they're sitting out there in his driveway and he didn't care. We sent him a letter. I don't know if he did anything, but yeah, well, definitely.
All right. Are there really 42 people on this caller?
At peak there was 45. Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive. Okay, well, let's try to finish this out, huh? Let's see what we got next. Mulching. Are we ready to go?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So one of the things that we do consistently with all our new plantings is mulch all our trees, and this really helps with establishment for newly planted trees. You don't necessarily have to use wood chips. If you use wood chips or bark, you are going to help to improve the organic levels in the soil. You are going to improve the soil to some degree, but you're also going to have to reapply it because it's going to decompose. So you can use rock too, pea gravel or decorative rock, whatever. That stuff's not going to blow away either. So what they found is that rock and mulch both reduce soil evaporation by up to 30%. So I guess pick what works best for your situation. There's just a ton of benefits to mulch. You don't want to over mulch. You don't want more than 4 inches depth for sure, but it prevents competition with grass and weeds. It improves soil aeration, protects your tree from mowers. That's a big issue we have in our parks. And reduces soil temperature extremes, so kind of helps insulate the soil. So hopefully all of you are mulching. Mowers, trimmers, this drives me just bonkers. We get this every year in our parks and our golf courses. We actually spray where we're not mulching younger trees, where we have larger trees or mature trees. We spray Roundup around the stem to kill the grass so that the weed eaters and mowers don't have to come in close to the stem. And yet we still get damage. Even, when we have trunk protectors on the trees, they find a way to damage the tree. So when a tree is trying to get established, it is so vulnerable to damage. You know, if it incurs damage, if it has to compete with grass or weeds, it takes longer for the tree to establish. It doesn't put on good growth. So you definitely want to protect, especially a younger tree that has the thinner bark, as much as you can. So, you know, I like to get pictures in town of, you know, disasters, and there's usually quite a few of them. Here's a row of ash. You know, they're, you know, not a good choice, of course. These trees were planted right before I came on with the city, and so this one's dead. You know, what do you think killed it? You guys probably know, but look closer, and you know, the tree's girdled all the way around it. And it's amazing how many calls I get from businesses. They say, all my trees have died. Will you come out and look at them? I go out and look at them, and it's mower damage, string trimmer damage, you know. Who's mowing your lawn? Well, you know, Acme Lawn Care. Well, you know, they're killing your trees. You know, they should be paying you instead of you paying them, because they've just killed a whole line of trees, and, you know, at your grocery store. So this is really common. Don't do it at home. So there's been a lot of research on grass versus tree roots, and what they found is grass is a really fierce competitor with tree roots. Tree roots grow in that same profile where grass is growing, where the roots of the grass are growing. They're showing that, you know, turf roots put out chemicals that prohibit tree roots from getting established. So, you know, you want to keep grass away from the stem at a minimum, and then try to create an area around the stem as large as possible that's free from turf grass roots. If you can, you know, in my yard, I try to get a 4 to 5 foot mulch ring around my trees if I can. You know, so often I see turf, you know, sod rolled right up to the stem of the tree. And you've seen how thick sod is, the roots that are on sod grass. And just imagine that being rolled over the top of a root ball. I mean, as dense as that root system is on the turf, it's so hard for water to get through there to get to the trees. So don't put the grass up next to the stem of the tree. So this is one of my favorite little presentations that I do. It's growing trees in mulch versus turf. So these trees, you know, this is development Cheyenne, commercial development, trees planted at the same time. This, although you can't see the mulch, this is actually a little mulch bed with juniper and some perennials in there. And so it's not only benefiting from no competition from turf, but there's a symbiotic relationship the roots have with other woody vegetation, such as the juniper and maybe these perennials too. So you can see the difference in size, the difference in growth rate. This tree, if you look closer at it, you can see the main stem is here, and then it died back, and now it's come back. It's getting hit by mowers. The turf is out competing it. There's no mulch around it, and this is the result. This is the tree that you're going to get if you don't protect this trunk and you don't provide better conditions for the root system. Here's another one at a restaurant in Cheyenne, same variety of elm tree. Here's one growing in rock on a drip system versus in turf on a sprinkler system with no mulch around it. You can see this tree is struggling, really hasn't grown much since it was planted. This tree is established now and is growing rapidly. So there is advantages too to a drip system over a sprinkler system, because a drip system you can put right on the root ball and it'll go right to the roots. Sprinkler system may or may not get to the root system depending on whether you've mulched the tree or whether the roots are accessible to the water. All right, so this is in, where was this? My memory. I think this is in Nebraska. I think this was Scotts Bluff or Gearing. And you wouldn't believe the mulching they do. I think it was Scotts Bluff. They do in Scotts Bluff. Okay, here's a newly planted tree. This is like a 10-foot diameter mulch ring. And we do 4 foot, you know, in our parks. And we think a lot of the parks people don't like it, but this is just amazing. And see what they're doing. They're spraying Roundup on the edges even. They don't want that turf to move into the mulch. So they're spraying Roundup. So they're mulching and they're spraying Roundup around it. So they are going to maintain this 10 foot no matter what. And they've got the, look at that. They've got the stem protected and they've got it staked with 3 stakes. So it's a catalpa. Can't grow those in Cheyenne very easily, but they know what they're doing in Scotts Bluff, definitely. So weeds and grass will, you know, seed into the mulch. And so you're going to have to spray Roundup. You're going to have to pull them either way. People get worried about spraying glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. If you do hit the stem, you're going to be okay as long as you don't hit leaves, as long as the bark isn't green. If it's a real young tree with green bark, you might damage the tree, but in most cases you won't. If it's a tree that suckers though, don't hit the leaves with the Roundup. Remember, wood mulch does become soil, so you're going to have to replace it pretty regularly. And where wind is a problem, that's us. Wind is a problem in Cheyenne, if you didn't know. Use this big mulch, this coarse mulch. You can see this is really coarse, large mulch. Not going to blow away as easily. Here's the, is this Dos Equis guy? Yeah. So don't do the mulch volcano. I have seen this in Cheyenne. You see it a lot in the southern states of the United States, but not so much in Cheyenne. I have seen it though. Water just does not get through, you know, 8 inches of mulch. So just keep it to 2 to 4 inches. That's plenty. Any more than that, and you're gonna reduce the amount of water that's getting down through it. Some nice examples of landscaping with different mulch. This bottom picture is in Cheyenne. I believe this is at Holly Frontier. And then this top one's in Casper. You can see I'm really pushing mulch here. So take home message here is mulch all your trees, definitely. More reasons to mulch young trees. We've seen this a lot on city property, you know, where we allow the grass to grow back into the mulch and reestablish itself. We do see an effect on the tree. The tree doesn't grow as fast, is more susceptible to insect and disease problems. So really try to keep the tree mulched as long as possible.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
What is your opinion of those black rubber tree rings that are sold at the box stores?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've got a slide on those because they are pretty prevalent throughout the community. I've seen them in several cases where they put them down and they forget about them, and grass eventually grows in there, grows through them. They are good at keeping the grass out for a little while, but eventually the grass does get through them. You know, it does keep the grass out for a little while. It doesn't improve the soil quality at all, of course, like wood chips. It's better than doing nothing, but it's kind of the lazy man's arborist mulch, you know, I guess you could say, but yeah, I would use rock or wood chips myself. Here's an example. This is at Chadron State, Nebraska. Any Nebraskans on here? I'm really promoting your state, so you should feel proud. You can see they've got the cement edging here so the grass doesn't move past that, and just a lot of mulching. This is in Scotts Bluff. So if you've got areas, this is in a park that doesn't drain very well, and so a lot of the trees that were planted at park level or at the original grade just were getting waterlogged. And so they build these mounds, and then the trees where the water can actually run off to some degree. And they put mulch on these mounds, and now these trees are doing well. This is in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Go Packers. A lot of larger communities are mulching their parks completely with no grass. I love this idea. I don't think it would go over yet in Cheyenne, but where you've got trees in fairly close proximity, where they're already starting to shade out the turf, why not eliminate the turf and just put down wood chips or mulch, similar to what you'd find in a natural forest situation. Bottom picture is actually in Casper. This is a small park on the south side of Casper where they've mulched the entire park and they've got trees and perennials growing. Unfortunately, you know, in the case of this park, they chose the wrong trees. They chose, I think this is lance leaf cottonwood, and they will sucker. And so you've got suckers coming up in the mulch, and so they're dealing with that issue. So if you choose the right trees, you're not going to have that problem. But something that I'd like to see more of is just eliminating turf grass altogether. You know, just because you mulch doesn't mean you're not going to get weeds, doesn't mean you're not going to have to do maintenance. You know, even if you put down weed barrier, and you see this all over Cheyenne and other communities, they put down weed barrier, then they put on rock, and they assume they're never going to get weeds. But in Cheyenne, where it's windy, we get soil that blows in, dust blows in. Only good for a few years, and then you have this issue. So you're always going to have to maintain these areas, and it takes time. Rock works well too. These are just some examples. This is at the school district admin building. Look how much rock they put around these little trees. I think that's great. That keeps the mowers away from them. That root system is going to establish faster. That's going to reduce evaporation from the soil. You know, this is a long story, or not, well, the other street up here story, but instead of turfing, you know, putting sod in these boulevards, why not put rock with, you know, ground juniper? So there's, you know, there's alternatives to turf grass, I think, that we should be considering. This is at the hospital in Cheyenne. There's those rubber mats that somebody mentioned. You know, we see this rubber, this is like what you'd see on a track, you know, at a high school or something, same kind of material. I think this was in Powell, Wyoming, and I don't know, I don't like it myself, but I guess it's better than nothing. And then this is funny, this is along Del Range. This business thought they'd put in turf, or AstroTurf, you know, synthetic grass, and they wouldn't get any weeds, but dang, if the weeds didn't grow right through that AstroTurf. There's one there, and you know, these are just creeping over the top, but there was weeds all over this thing. So even when you put down AstroTurf, you're still going to get weeds coming through.
So Mark,
Yeah.
I've got a great AstroTurf story. I did a yard call, and the tree wasn't doing well at all. And, you know, just a little crabapple in a state of decline. And they had AstroTurf under the deck, going down a little slope to the tree and then kind of around the tree. And the people who installed it said, oh, you don't have to worry about drainage, you know, it won't puddle, the water will go right through the AstroTurf. And you could just, it had kind of a funky smell. I was down on my hands and knees, so I was getting pretty close to this. And just on a whim, I thought, you know, this doesn't feel right. And so I started to pull the AstroTurf back, and it was full of slugs. Full of slugs. And the homeowner, of course, watching me do this, she wasn't prepared for slugs. But it's just, the soil was just rank,
Yeah.
just rank. So AstroTurf, not a good mulch ever.
And I'm seeing it more and more on new developments in Cheyenne. There's a lot for it too. And we're trying to decide how should we've never been, we give points. You have to acquire so many points per site, and you get points for turf, for perennials, for trees. What do we give AstroTurf? It's
minus 10.
pathetic.
Minus 10.
We're struggling with it. I mean, it's better than an impervious surface such as concrete or asphalt, I suppose, because it allows the water to go through. It's supposed to anyway, but yeah, it doesn't provide any of those benefits that living plants provide. So
no.
Yeah. Grates, we take care of the trees in the downtown, so we're always removing grates. It's unfortunate that this was a trend, to plant trees in grates. It's so expensive. These grate systems are $2,000 a piece. You're planting a $200 tree in there, and then you have to remove them, and so it's a disaster. And so we're trying to look at ways to move beyond grates to improve growing conditions for trees in built settings and urban settings. And so this is an example from Portland on the right. I believe this is Longmont on the left, but I'm trying to move to creating better rooting area for trees in built environments. This is in Casper. This one just blew me away. Why would you create all this impervious surface in a residential neighborhood? Just crazy. Look at all the runoff you're going to get there. And you have these little cutouts for the trees. It's
this is ugly. Yeah. This is ugly.
So these are just examples of better options than what we just saw from Casper. This is Denver and Centera, I think. Here's DuBois, Wyoming. Isn't that beautiful? You get Bend to DuBois. This is the corner you have to take when you're going through town. And beautiful little pocket park that they created in DuBois with cottonwoods and mulch, and pretty cool for a little town. So I mentioned Roundup. So this is a small town in Wyoming. I think it's Mountain View. They're spraying around their trees. They maybe can't do the mulchings, but they're still removing the grass. So Roundup is acceptable. Boy, I didn't realize I had so many mulch slides here. I'm sorry. I'm probably starting to bore you here, but really driving home the message, aren't I? Okay, so I think this might be our last mulch picture. So this is staking. Okay, good. We're moving on. So just options for staking. You saw in the video, you can use arbor tie. You can use straps with wire. There's just a lot of options out there for staking. Just make sure you don't leave it on more than 2 years. I see a lot of instances where the staking is left on and it girdles the stem. So don't do that. Also remove the bamboo. There's some contractors in Cheyenne that leave the bamboo on and it ends up girdling the tree. Bamboo doesn't break down. This tape, this horticultural tape doesn't break down and ends up girdling the tree. So make sure and get that stuff off. Here's our watering bag. Talk a little bit about watering newly planted trees. It's so important. When I look at tree fatalities, especially young trees, probably 80% are due to lack of water. The rest, the other 20% is usually mowers, but watering is so important. The turf irrigation system doesn't run on a tree schedule. It typically is like every other day, which is too much, too often, and then it doesn't put down a lot of water. When setting your irrigation systems, you should try to water 2 to 3 times per week and try to put down more water. That's going to really benefit your trees. It'll help to establish a deeper root system for your turf so it's more drought tolerant. But consider a drip system. You know, we try to do drip systems wherever we can, and make sure it's getting to the root ball. I see a lot of drip systems that are outside the root ball. There's this misconception that if you water outside the roots are going to go find that water, and that's not true. They're going to grow out, but you have to put the water where the roots are. So make sure you're putting the water where the roots are. Here's the gator bag that we've been talking about, the water bag. You can actually zip 2 or 3 of these together to get up to 40, 80 gallons if you need to. So they're pretty handy in that regard. Should water at least once per week. You know, potted trees, you may want to water more than that, probably twice per week is better. 10 gallons per inch of caliper. Here's that lower profile water bag that I mentioned earlier that you could use for shrubs or for conifers. This is an example of, you know, the Netafim type drip tubing. We tend to use that. We'll put drip tubing around the stem, and you can get more than, you know, 2 or 3 emitters. You can get 5, 6, 7 emitters around the stem of the tree. So you're getting the water more evenly distributed around the root system. Here's just an example of building the berm on the left there. If you have excess soil. That's at the Arboretum in Sheridan, I believe.
So Mark,
Yes.
on those, you know, building that little wall to hold the water in, those little dams.
Yes.
Here in Laramie County, I find that what happens is that the blow dirt fills those in, and then all of a sudden you've got another 2 to 3 inches of soil on top of that root ball. I fight that out at my place all the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can definitely see that happening.
Yeah, so I don't do wells around my trees anymore. I mulch the heck out of them, but I don't do wells anymore.
Sure. Yeah, and we tend to plant ours a little high, you know, and so the well doesn't really work very well. The nice thing about the well is you can fill it up and go, so it's easier, you know, for our seasonals to water trees, but there are some negatives to it too.
Yeah, and that tree looks like it's been planted too deep.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Any other questions about mulching or about watering?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you talk more about using a living ground cover? Because you had an example of some understory plants and perennials being beneficial. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. Yeah, it's you know, there's a lot of research out there that shows that trees planted in conjunction with other woody plants, perennials, shrubs, that sort of thing, form a symbiotic, you know, relationship in terms of the roots and benefit one another in terms of moisture, you know, being able to pull moisture and nutrients from the soil. And so it is a good idea. You know, I wouldn't plant flowers, you know, annuals around trees, but shrubs, other woody plants, it's a good idea, and it helps protect them possibly from mower damage or sun scald or what have you. So yeah, that's definitely something that I would consider. And, you know, because, you know, most of the trees we plant are in turf situations, we don't do that. But whenever we're in landscaped islands, medians, that sort of thing, we definitely plant shrubs and perennials in conjunction with trees because of those benefits.
Any guidelines as to certain species that are in terms of, you know, companion shrubs or certain ones that are more beneficial or potentially harmful to plant along with trees, and kind of how close or how far away to plant them?
Whew, I don't know of any guide for that type of thing. As long as you're planting, a shrub or perennial that's hardy to our area, I think you should be fine. And you want to give the tree space for it to grow in terms of the stem size, but yeah, I think that's a great idea. Okay, winter watering.
Excuse me, Mark, you're talking about per caliper. What does that mean? Of caliper.
So that's stem diameter. So if you've planted a 2-inch diameter tree, it should get 20 gallons per watering cycle. So 10 gallons per every 1 inch stem diameter. So winter watering is so critical in Cheyenne due to our winds. Trees are always transpiring, and even more so in Cheyenne. We spend so much time and effort into trying to keep our trees alive in the winter, especially young conifers. If you have young conifers, man, you got to get out there and water once a month at least in Cheyenne. You may even consider spraying transparent on the needles themselves too to reduce transpiration. But yeah, watering is so important. Not just conifers too. We water all our trees, all our newly planted trees especially. Here's Dave. Don't you wish you guys all had a big 5,000-gallon tanker you could go out and water your conifers with? But yeah, we empty that thing 3 times a day on a lot of our dryland conifers in Lions Park, North Park, other places. So a lot of these trees, it's interesting because our climate's changing, it's getting drier. A lot of these trees did fine 10 years ago without supplemental watering, and because this past year we got 10 inches of natural moisture. Our average is 16. So it's just we're finding our climate in Cheyenne's becoming more and more xeric. So we're not going to be planting spruce anymore in dryland situations. It's not hardy to that environment. We're going to have to be planting juniper and pinyon, and that's probably it. Maybe shrubs, because our climate's changing, unfortunately. Okay, established. When is a tree established? So the reason I'm bringing this up is you don't want to start pruning a tree. We're going to get into pruning here shortly. You don't want to start pruning a young tree until it becomes established. And what I mean by established is when that tree has started to put on decent growth, it has overcome the stress of being transplanted, and it's healthy, vigorous, that sort of thing. And so these are just 2 species, the one on the left being hackberry. You can see it's starting to put on growth now. If you look at the terminal buds on the branches, the extension of the branches is starting to occur. And then on the bur oak on the right, you can see the lighter color growth. This is the older growth is darker colored, the younger being lighter. So it's starting to put on, 6-8 inches of growth. For hackberry, this might take 3 to 5 years. For bur oak, probably the same. But once they've become established, then you can start pruning. I got ahead of myself. So also, you can tell this tree's become established. This is an elm tree. You can see the growth on it as well. The new growth is fairly long. But you want to adjust your turf irrigation. I mentioned this earlier, less frequent, more quantity. Aerating is so important for trees. Aerate that turf twice a year. Supplemental watering is still important with evergreens, especially in the winter. Protect that trunk zone is necessary. So as you're moving from a young tree to a developing tree, the bark is getting thicker, and it will start to be more of a protective level against damage, but you still want to maintain an area free of turf around the stem, and then fertilize as necessary. I don't recommend fertilizing trees in general. You know, if you pick the right tree, you're not going to have to fertilize it, but if your lawn requires fertilization, it's definitely not going to affect the tree, not going to hurt the tree. Don't recommend fertilizer spikes or injections for fertilizer or anything like that. Okay, here we go. Here's pruning. All right. Any other questions on that last little section before we go into pruning? Okay. So when to prune? What time of year? For us, you know, we prune pretty much year round just because of the workload we have. If you don't have that workload and can be, you know, you can choose your own time to prune. The winter is definitely the best time to prune. The tree is dormant. You don't have the leaves on the tree, and so it's easier to identify, you know, which branches need to be pruned out. Spring, you typically want to do it before bud break. For fruit tree pruning, it's an option. However, you know, diseases can be spread, such as fire blight. You know, once the tree starts to become active, diseases are active. And so got to be careful with some of our bacterial diseases. Summer, you know, that's probably the best time to do clearance pruning. In the winter time, you really don't know how low those lower branches are going to hang because they don't have the weight of the leaves on them. And so summer is a good time to do that. Fall, they say, is not the best time due to decay fungi are active. I don't know how true that is, but that's what the experts say. So we're going to kind of go through how to make that pruning cut. Many of you probably already know how to do this, but we'll go through it anyway. So to avoid, you know, cutting off a branch and causing the weight of the branch to strip down the side of the stem, you want to make an undercut followed by a second top cut that is out further on the branch. By making that second top cut, the weight of the branch then breaks into the first cut, and the branch then breaks away, and you've reduced the weight of the branch now where you can make a final cut. And you want to make that final cut outside the collar and the branch bark ridge. So this is important that you don't cut into that area of the tree that includes that tissue which is going to seal off that wound. And so by removing that bulgy part of the branch, then you are going to prevent the branch from sealing off properly. So try to make that cut outside that branch bark ridge and collar. You can see here's an example on the bottom, and you can see it's a round cut. If you have an oval cut, that tells me that you may have cut into the collar. You don't want to do that. Okay, so usually on a lot of tree species, it's pretty obvious. In this one, you can see it real easy. There's the ridge, there's the collar. It's pretty obvious where you're going to make that cut. Here's an example in Douglas where they made a flush cut is what we call it. So you can see the ridge is there, but the collar is gone. They cut into the collar, and what we're seeing is decay now. You see a little bit of that callus material trying to close that wound, but you see a lot more decay near the bottom of where that cut was made. So you don't want to make these flush cuts. Another thing that we see a lot of is lion's tailing. This is pruning all the interior branches out of a mature tree. This is a American elm in Cheyenne, and this was a picture I got on Google Earth. What a beautiful tree that was, right? Here the homeowner hired somebody, homeowner's like, well, I heard, you should prune a tree every so many years, so I'm going to hire somebody to prune my tree. And look what they did. They removed probably 70, 60 70% of the live branch, or, live crown, live leaf area, and totally lion's tailed it. I've been watching this tree. It actually survived. It recovered, but it just set this tree back totally. I mean, it's the growth slowed down. It made it vulnerable to insect and disease attack. It didn't do any favors to this tree, but it did survive. So if you're going to have your tree pruned, your large tree pruned, make sure they don't lion's tail it. Unfortunately, there was a lot of water sprouting that occurred on these branches. And so instead of having these strong branch connections that it had originally, you've got these weak attachments now as a result of the water sprouting. So this is
What is
more
water sprouting?
Oh, go ahead.
What is water sprouting?
Water sprouting is the tree's response to a dramatic reduction in the leaf area. So it needs leaves bad to produce food. So you're starving the tree by lion's tailing it. And so it sends out these really poorly attached long water sprouts that inevitably break off of the branch because they're weakly attached. That's what you find after topping cuts as well. And so it does serve the tree in that it puts out leaves, but in the long run, it's not good for the tree because you're likely a lot of these are going to break off. You're going to have large wounds that are going to form where that breakage occurs. You might get decay. So it's just, it turns into a downward kind of spiral for the tree once that starts to happen. So this is, an example of a mature ash tree that was pruned by somebody who knew what they were doing. They left a lot of those, look at a lot of those smaller branches that are interior on the larger limbs. They left a lot of those, and those help the tree, with food production, with shading, prevents from sun scald and sunburning. And so this is what a tree should look like when it's pruned properly, and looks more natural, doesn't it? Topping. So luckily we don't see a lot of topping in Cheyenne. I do see it every once in a while, but topping is illegal in Cheyenne by ordinance. And so someone who does top in Cheyenne, they could be guilty of a misdemeanor, will have to go to court, that sort of thing. The utility company does not do topping. Their contractor is good at doing directional pruning, but every now and then we do see it. And so you see it a lot more in rural communities, smaller towns, unfortunately. But what is topping? So it's just indiscriminately cutting back the crown of the tree, not cutting back the branches. So if you're going to reduce the height of a tree, you cut back to a branch at least 1/3 of the size of the branch you're removing, and then you will see all these water sprouts. So you get, as a result of topping, you get all these water sprouts. All these are weakly attached. You get decay. These water sprouts break out, cause damage. You're really shortening the lifespan of the tree when you top it. There's a lot of misconceptions because of all the rapid new growth after topping cut. Some people think, I'm invigorating the tree, and for that first year it may appear that way, but really you're shortening the life of the tree. You're condemning the tree to an eventual death for sure. So never recommend topping to anybody. Okay, we're going to get into structural pruning a little bit. So this is just pruning small trees or young trees for structure to prevent damage from snow or from wind. You don't see this very often, unfortunately. Most of the time people prune trees in a reactionary fashion. Once there's a branch that breaks, then they prune it. They might prune a tree to raise it up, but in terms of pruning it to improve the structure and longevity of the tree, it just doesn't happen very often. And so this is something that's important. And there are arborists in Cheyenne that will do this service. We go to lengths to train our staff to do this because it's very important to the longevity of our trees. So when I'm talking about structure, these are two trees that have poor structure. So you can see what we'd like to see in shade trees is a strong central leader. And what we have in this situation, here's an arrowleaf cottonwood with two codominant leaders. These two leaders are continuing to grow. We have this rubbing that's occurring. We have decay that's occurring. There's a weak attachment between these two leaders, and so they're prone to failing. This is an ash tree that failed as a result of a heavy snow load, a codominant, or if they had pruned out one of these codominant leaders and created a strong central leader, they could have avoided this. The issue with, having a tree with poor structure is once it does sustain damage, a lot of times your only choice is to remove it. In this case, when half of the stem is damaged to this degree, you have to remove it. So that's unfortunate because in this situation, this small community invested, 15 years in this tree, and to have to remove it after a snowstorm is really, really tragic. So these are some of the concepts we're talking about. Double leaders. If you get a tree with a double leader, which is so common in fast growing trees such as cottonwood and elm and maple, you want to try to remove it. So here we have a nice little tree growing up, and then we get a branch that gets a little happy and starts to compete with the main leader. So now we've got a tight branch angle that's weakly attached. This is a point of failure in the future if we don't remove it. And so by pruning out that leader, now we've prevented that from happening. So branch angles. So when you're looking at which branches am I going to prune out of this tree for structure? How am I going to create strong structure in this tree? You want to reduce the number of narrow angles. Narrow angles are weak. So our ideal angles are at 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock. So you can see on the left there, those are more strong, structurally strong angles. When you've got that tight angle, like at 11 or 1 o'clock, those are the branches you got to be concerned about. Get rid of those. So what we found is that codominant branches don't form this strong branch union with a branch bark ridge and collar, and so they are prone to breaking. And so you want to try to eliminate those as best you can. Also, larger branches. This is hard to imagine, but larger branches actually are more weakly attached to the stem than smaller branches. So if you have a small branch and a larger branch growing out of the stem in a similar location, removing the larger branch is going to increase the structural integrity of that tree. So getting into the steps of structural pruning, how much should you remove? How much total leaf area or total crown? Usually we say a quarter to a third, depending on the health of the tree and the growth rate. This is a little leaf linden, has terrible structure typically, a lot of upright and narrow angles, branch angles. So what you want to look for are double leaders, the branch angle, the branch size, and then think about the temporary versus permanent branches. And this is a lot to handle right here. This is, remember Catherine, this is where we did our little breakout where we had the Siberian elm volunteers and we do some pruning, because this is tough to do in a PowerPoint situation.
Oh yeah.
You really have to do it to understand it. And
Right.
so
And that can be a field trip a little bit later on. We go back up to Archer and go prune on the trees up at Archer.
let's do it, because yes, we need to do this in the field to really completely understand what I'm talking about. So if this is going over your head, I understand. I'm sorry. So here's an example of an accolade elm that I pruned, and you can see on the left, prior to pruning, we've kind of got a double leader, right? Near the top there, you can see 2 leaders. And so on the right is kind of what it looks like after. You can see that we've eliminated one of those leaders. We've tried to eliminate some of the poor branch angles, reduced some of the other branches that we thought were weak, but that's kind of what we're looking for structural pruning before and after. And that's it? That's my last slide. Yes. So we have got some time. That was 2.5 hours though. You guys might be done at this point. There they go. There, I hear the sounds. I don't blame you. Go ahead. If there are questions, I'll take them. If not, thanks for bearing with me through that.
Yeah, if you've got questions, by all means, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, put it in chat and then I'll ask on your behalf. One question that's in here, Mark, is when does a tree ever truly get established, and when do you stop watering, or when do you know how much to stop, or what's your rule of thumb with that, with trees and establishing trees?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, it takes a while in Cheyenne. It depends on where you're growing the tree. If it's in a dry land situation, you know, you're going to have to hand water that tree for several years. You know, if it's in a turf irrigation situation, it might establish quicker, but it typically takes our trees, you know, on city property 3 to 5 years, depending on the species and the situation. And, you know, as far as the watering, you know, if you have a turf irrigation system, what you're giving your turf is should be adequate for a tree. However, you don't water your turf in the winter, so you should be winter watering your tree in the winter. I would try to adjust, as I mentioned, your turf irrigation system to water less frequently, though, with more volume.
How do the principles as far as pruning a tree apply to bushes, like a chokecherry bush?
Yeah, you know, you don't have to worry so much about structure pruning shrubs, definitely. You know, with shrubs, you can use a hedge clipper, trimmer, you know, you don't necessarily have to cut back to another branch. But with a hedge trimmer, you are going to see some dieback, you know, as a result of that, typically.
The reason is we turned our chokecherry bush into a tree. I mean, it really is like a tree, been pruned up that way, so it wouldn't go wider. And I tried to get an arborist to top it. I said, I want it topped because it's shading my garden, right? Yeah. He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. Wow. He said, he'll kill it. And I said, I want it topped, but he wouldn't do it. So anyway.
Oh, good. Good for him.
Hey,
yeah.
The word's getting around. Yeah, yeah. In that case, it probably would have been okay. I mean, topping is mostly, you know, I'm mostly concerned about topping in large shade trees. For shrubby trees, or, you know, in your case, a shrub that you pruned into a tree, you know, that's probably okay. But
we got lots of suckers wanting to come up, and you know.
Yeah. Chokecherry's good for that.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
I did want to ask your opinion. You had a lot of examples of elms, and I have a area on my property that's kind of a draw for a flood zone, like a flood mitigation path. And I was wanting to plant some big trees next to it, and I wanted to plant cottonwood, but the conservation district kind of recommended against cottonwood because it takes so much water. So I was thinking of elm as a better tree. I don't see a lot of big elm planted around Cheyenne, or maybe I'm just not seeing it. It seems like most everyone plants cottonwood. Do you have any? Do you prefer one over the other?
You know, the advantage to elm is it's longer lived. You know, an elm tree is going to live in a lot of cases twice as long as a cottonwood. You know, as far as the water consumption, you know, cottonwood might take a little more water, but I don't think it's significantly more than an elm. Yeah, you know, you know, we see it, there's a lot of Siberian elm in Cheyenne. I don't know if I brought up Siberian elm, but that's kind of a junky tree that I wouldn't recommend planting. You know, the Accolade elm is outstanding. There's some American elm that are really good too. And those, you know, you can find those in Fort Collins. I'm not sure any nurseries in Cheyenne have them, but Fort Collins would for sure. But, you know, both of them are riparian species. You know, in elm, you know, American elm's native range, you do find it as a riparian species. And of course, cottonwood is too. Cottonwood is native though, and you'd think cottonwood would probably provide better wildlife habitat, you know, because it's native, you know. So if it is a wet area, you know, cottonwood and willow might be my suggestion, but you know, elm's okay too. I just wouldn't do one species, you know, I would do several. You know, box elder is also native to riparian areas in Wyoming. There's others too, you know, there's water birch. There's several.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there's no water standing in it except for a small part of it, but
yeah,
I imagine during a heavy rainstorm there would be.
Sure. Yeah, and that Accolade elm that I mentioned is really drought tolerant too. So it will be able to withstand periods without water, but it'll also, you know, withstand flooding. Cottonwood's the same way though too. Cottonwood's very drought tolerant as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Mark, question here. I have 10 topped Colorado blue spruce trees on my property under a power line. Should I get rid of them now?
You know, if it were me, if they were, you know, if they're protecting my property from wind, you know, if it's on the north or west side of my house, I'd probably leave them just because they're such a dense canopy tree, provides so much wind protection. You know, at this point, you know, you're going to have to settle with the ugly appearance of them. But if they're, you know, providing a service to you, I'd leave them. If not, you know, they are going to be ugly being topped. You know, they're going to have to be topped every 3 to 5 years probably. And so they're going to look unnatural. You know, if you don't like the looks of that, I'd plant a low growing conifer or a low growing deciduous ornamental tree instead.
How far below a power line does your tree have to be?
They want to maintain 10 feet from a energized power line. So they're gonna, anything that's within 10 feet, they're gonna prune.
Is that the same in the county as in the city?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
And then Dee wants to know who takes care of the trees at the Supreme Court. It's a great example of a variety of trees in Cheyenne. Does the city maintain them or the state?
At the Supreme Court?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the state A&I department. And that area was Cheyenne's first city park, actually. And we gave that land to this, gave or traded. Maybe we traded. I think we got North Park out of it. I can't remember, but that used to be city property, and a lot of those old trees were, you'll find little plaques on them because it was part of the city's old tree walk, I guess. But yeah, the state A&I department takes care of those.
Okay. That's pretty much it, what I've got in here. you know, and some of your questions kind of, we really need to be in the field and be looking at trees. And we will do that later once the weather gets a little better. We'll do a tree walk and actually a tree walk downtown Cheyenne. Just, you would be amazed at all the great examples of bad downtown Cheyenne. And so we'll do that. And then, and I'm not talking about trees that the city's planted. I'm talking about privately owned or privately planted trees. This is some great examples. And then at some point we'll do a field trip out to Archer and prune, have some tree pruning lessons. They have a whole bunch of Siberian elms or Chinese elms up there that lots and lots.
Yeah.
Yep. And or we can keep it close to home and we can stay at LCCC and prune the trees at LCCC. I kind of have permanent permission to do that.
Good.
Okay. I think that's all we've got for tonight, everybody. Questions, bring questions to Monday night class, which is trees part 2. And we can see if I can answer your questions for you, but it's always wonderful to have tree experts teach this class because I always learn something new. So everybody have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep, stay
Thanks,
safe,
Mark.
everybody. And again,
Thanks,
this was also
Catherine.
been recorded, so if you need to go back, it's here. So good night, everybody. Mark, again, thank you.
Welcome. Good night.